In Blackwood, we have one rule: never be outside after 7 p.m. That night, I broke it. Part 1, Rule 1: be home before the sun disappears. I grew up in Alaska where the horizon seems endless. The forests breathe like living things, and the mountains cast shadows that last longer than daylight. People romanticize this place from afar. Wild beauty, freedom, the northern lights spilling across the sky like ribbons of fire. But the Alaska I knew wasn't the postcard kind. It was a town swallowed by silence when night fell, a town that survived on rules. Rules passed down through whispers and warnings, rules that outsiders laughed at until they vanished. The first rule was simple: be home before the sun disappears. It sounds harmless, doesn't it? Like the curfews our parents gave us when we were teenagers. But in my hometown near Denali, this wasn't a suggestion. It was survival. You didn't linger on the streets when the last streaks of orange faded into the jagged teeth of the mountains. You didn't take a quick walk beneath the stars, and you damn sure didn't test the dark. The first time I saw what happens to people who broke the rule, I was 9, and that memory still haunts me 20 years later. It was mid-January, one of those days where the sun barely drags itself across the horizon. A man named Richard Lane, he was new, a trucker who decided to settle down with his wife, was late leaving the tavern. He told everyone he didn't buy into the boogeyman bedtime, that he'd lived through worse storms, worse nights. He was laughing as he stumbled down Main Street with a cigarette in his mouth, his breath puffing clouds into the frozen air. I was across the street, holding my grandfather's hand. We'd gone to buy flour before the store closed. I remember the way my grandfather tightened his grip on me as Richard passed. He didn't say a word, but I saw it in his eyes, sorrow, because he knew Richard wasn't making it home. 10 minutes later, screams echoed from the street. People peeked through curtains, but no one came out. That's the other part of the rule. After sundown, you don't open your door for anyone. Not even for friends, not even if it's family. The screams rose, sharp and ragged, and then cut off so suddenly it was as if the night itself had swallowed him. The next morning they found his jacket in the snow, shredded along the seams as if torn from the inside. His body was never recovered. His wife left town 3 days later without saying goodbye. That was when I understood. In our town, you either obeyed the rules or you didn't survive long enough to regret it. Now I'm older, and I've learned the truth goes deeper than that story, deeper than the warnings carved into my childhood. The rule about sundown wasn't just about fear of predators or storms or wolves. It was about something older, something that moved in the dark, something the town refused to name. When I was 23, I broke that rule, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And what I saw that night confirmed everything I had ever feared, and revealed what no one in Blackwood dared to say out loud. The night it happened started like any other. I just finished a late shift at Miller's Grocery, my apron stiff with flour and sugar dust, when I saw headlights glowing at the edge of Pine Street. A moving truck. My heart sank. Outsiders. Another family thinking they could tame this place. That life in our corner of Alaska would be cheaper, freer, simpler. They didn't understand what it meant to settle here. They never did. The house they chose had been empty nearly a year. The Henderson place, a 2-story cabin on Pine. The Hendersons had packed up in the dead of night without a word. That happened sometimes. People who'd lived here for generations vanished overnight, their houses left hollow. We didn't ask questions and we didn't pry. It was easier not to know. A woman with dark hair was hauling boxes to the porch, her breath turning to mist as the last glow of sun burned against the mountaintops. She moved confidently, her steps quick and careless, as though she had no idea the clock was ticking. That's when I realized she didn't know the rules. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. Look out for strangers, Emily. They don't know what waits after sunset, and if they don't learn fast, the dark will teach them in ways they won't survive. I hesitated, staring at the moving truck, the woman's silhouette outlined against the fading light. The sky was bruising to purple, shadows stretching long over Pine Street. I checked my watch. 5:30, 30 minutes, maybe less, before the sun disappeared. I should have gone home. I should have shut my door, locked the windows, and prayed she'd be smart enough to do the same. But something in me couldn't leave her there alone. I crossed the street. That choice, stepping into her driveway, calling out to her, that was the first mistake. And it was also the moment everything changed. What happened next is a story I never thought I'd tell, because even now, part of me fears speaking the truth will draw their attention again. But you need to hear it. You need to understand why the rules exist and why breaking them doesn't just endanger you. It endangers everyone. Because the night I helped Jessica Collins move into the Henderson house was the night I learned what hunts our town after dark. And once you learn the rules the way I did, there's no going back. Before I continue, if you want me to keep bringing you stories like this, real, raw, and unsettling, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps this story alive, and it's the only way I can keep digging into the darkness to share what really lurks there. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and let's keep walking into the night together. Now, back to that evening on Pine Street, the moment the sun slipped behind the mountain ridge and the rule was broken. Part 2. Rule 2, always respect the forest. When you grow up in Blackwood, you learn to fear two things, the dark and the forest. The first is simple. Darkness comes every night, and the rule is clear. Be inside, doors locked, windows shut. But the second rule, always respect the forest, is harder to explain. Outsiders think it means respecting nature, not littering or staying quiet on hikes. They think it's a quaint local saying. But in Blackwood, the forest isn't just trees and silence. It's alive in ways we can't understand, and it punishes those who don't show it the respect it demands. When Jessica Collins moved into the Henderson house, she didn't only ignore the first rule, she ignored the second. And that's what pulled us into the nightmare. It began the morning after she disappeared. I barely slept that night. I kept pacing my living room, every light blazing, the salt container clutched in my hands. Jessica hadn't answered my calls, and when I thought about her last words, "I'm not afraid of a little Alaska wilderness," my stomach twisted. That phrase echoed like a dare thrown into the teeth of the forest itself. At first light, I met Officer Daniel Kim on Pine Street. His cruiser was parked behind Jessica's moving truck, its back door still hanging open. Boxes littered the porch like abandoned offerings. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that feels staged, like the world is holding its breath. "She's gone," Daniel said grimly. His dark eyes scanned the tree line at the back of the Henderson property. And the forest swallowed her. He wasn't being poetic. He meant it. We searched the house first. Purse on the counter, wallet inside, car keys untouched, half-unpacked boxes, laptop open on a stack of books. It looked like someone had stepped out for just a moment, except Jessica hadn't stepped back in. In the backyard, Daniel crouched to study the ground. "Footprints," he muttered. I knelt beside him. Jessica's boots, clear as day, leading straight toward the tree line. The prints ended at the edge of the forest. Beyond that, the ground was too churned, too shadowed to make sense of. "You know what this means," I whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "She broke the second rule." Torn, when I was a child, I thought the forest was beautiful. Towering pines stretching so high, the wind seemed to whistle through their crowns. A carpet of moss and needles that smelled of resin and rain. Birds that called at dawn, deer that wandered into clearings. From the safety of daylight, the forest felt like a friend. But the forest has moods. My grandfather used to say, "It listens when you speak, and it remembers what you do." He told me never to whistle among the trees. It invites things that don't belong. Never carve names into bark. It angers the old ones. And never ever enter after sunset. Because then the forest belongs to them. The them was never defined. You didn't need it to be. When I was 11, my best friend Rachel Monroe dared me to follow her past the logging road at dusk. We wanted to see the aurora from a clearing the older kids whispered about. We thought it would be magical. But as the last light drained, the air changed. The forest grew too still, too quiet. And then we heard it. A whistle that wasn't ours, mimicking the tune Rachel had been carelessly piping moments earlier. We ran until our lungs burned. We never spoke of it again. That was my first real lesson in the second rule. The forest doesn't forgive arrogance. Standing at the Henderson backyard now, staring into that endless wall of pines, I felt the same dread from childhood rising in my chest. Jessica hadn't just ignored the curfew. She had walked willingly into the woods, laughing at our warnings. "We'll need to search," Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. He was a police officer, but he was also a Blackwood native. He knew what entering the forest could mean. "We can't go in at night," I said quickly. "Not even with salt. Not even armed." He nodded. "First light tomorrow. I'll call in a search team. Locals only." "Locals only," I echoed, because outsiders didn't understand how to survive out there. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat at my kitchen table with Jessica's laptop, scrolling through the files she had gathered. She hadn't moved to Blackwood blindly. She'd been investigating us. There were articles about disappearances dating back decades, newspaper clippings about hikers who never returned, hunters found torn apart, search parties that ended with more missing than before. Jessica had underlined one line in red ink. "The forest doesn't take people, it trades them." Trades them? For what? I shut the laptop when I thought I heard footsteps outside. But when I peeked through the curtain, no one was there, only the trees swaying in the wind. And the next morning, the search began. 10 of us, all locals, all armed with rifles, knives, and more importantly, bags of rock salt. I carried mine in a pouch strapped across my chest. Daniel led us, his expression set like stone. We moved into the forest in a straight line, keeping each other in sight. The ground was thick with frost, crunching beneath our boots. Breath fogged the air. My heart pounded harder with every step past the tree line. The forest was wrong that morning. Too silent. No bird song, no rustling squirrels. Even the wind seemed hesitant to touch the branches. After 20 minutes, we found the first sign. Jessica's scarf snagged on a low branch. I recognized it from the night before. Wool, deep green, still smelling faintly of her perfume. I stuffed it into my pocket. The tracks grew harder to follow. We split into pairs. Daniel and I headed northeast, deeper into the shadowed grove. That's when we heard it. "Help!" A woman's voice, faint but clear, drifting through the trees. "Jessica." Daniel froze. He raised a hand, signaling me to stop. His face was pale. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," I whispered. My throat was dry. The voice came again. "Please, I'm hurt." But something was wrong. It was too steady, too deliberate, like someone imitating what panic should sound like. Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. "It's a lure," he said flatly. Every instinct screamed at me to run toward the sound, to find Jessica. But my gut twisted with the same dread I'd felt at 11, when the forest whistled back Rachel's tune. The forest was speaking again. We pressed on carefully, marking our path with salt lines at intervals. My hand shook each time I poured it, but the ritual steadied me. The forest pressed in on all sides, the trunks like pillars in a cathedral of silence. After nearly an hour, we found the clearing. At first, it looked empty. Then I saw the ground. Grass flattened, a scattering of boxes from Jessica's move, dragged this far from the house. And in the center, footprints, dozens, not just Jessica's boots. Bare feet, large and small, circling, overlapping, leading into the trees. Daniel swore under his breath. I crouched to study the prints. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. And they didn't all look human. Some toes were too long, some arches twisted unnaturally. The sight made my stomach lurch. Suddenly, a crack echoed from the trees, a branch snapping under weight. Daniel swung his rifle up, aiming into the shadows. "We're not alone." I fumbled for my salt pouch, scattering a circle at our feet. My breathing was ragged. "Daniel!" Then from the shadows, something stepped into view. It wore Jessica's face, but it wasn't Jessica. Her features were too perfect, as if painted onto wax. Her eyes were pools of solid black, reflecting no light. Her smile was stretched, too wide, splitting across her cheeks. "Emily," it said in Jessica's voice. "Thank you for coming." My blood froze. Daniel fired a warning shot. The thing didn't flinch. It just tilted its head, studying us like a child watching insects in a jar. Behind it, more shapes emerged. Dozens. Some looked like people we'd known. Alex Murphy, Mrs. Fincher's grandson, the gas station attendant, all missing for years. Their faces pale copies, eyes black voids. The forest had given them back. Wrong. Daniel's voice was steady, but I could hear the fear beneath. Stay inside the salt. The creatures circled us slowly, whispering in voices that overlapped, almost human but not quite. The sound raised goosebumps on my skin. Then in unison, they spoke. Respect the forest, or join our collection. We held our ground until the others regrouped. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Shouts echoed. And slowly the creatures faded back into the trees, dissolving into shadow. But they didn't leave us untouched. On the ground at the edge of the clearing, I found Jessica's journal. The last page scrawled with frantic handwriting. They watch from the tree line. They want me to follow. If I do, maybe I'll understand. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The forest wasn't just dangerous, it was hungry, and Jessica had walked straight into its teeth. The second rule burned in my mind. Always respect the forest, because the forest remembers. And if you forget that, it will come for you. Part 3, Rule 3, salt is more than seasoning. People outside of Blackwood always laughed when I told them about salt. You mean like throwing salt over your shoulder for luck, they'd ask? Or making roads less icy? They never understood. For us, salt wasn't superstition. It was survival. You could tell which houses belonged to locals and which belonged to newcomers by their porches. Locals always kept lines of rock salt scattered across thresholds, windowsills, and fence gates. Some even hung salt pouches like charms above door frames. We sprinkled it, not because we believed, it was because we knew. Salt was the only thing that stopped them. That night, after the search party in the forest, and the thing that wore Jessica's face, I sat at my kitchen table with my grandfather's old salt pouch clenched tight in my fist. My body shook, but it wasn't from the cold. It was from memory, because salt had saved me once before. When I was 12, I had a nightmare that didn't feel like a dream. I woke to tapping on my bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. I thought it was Rachel Monroe playing a prank. She had that mischievous streak, always daring me into trouble. But when I pulled back the curtain, Rachel was there, except it wasn't her. Her hair hung flat against her face like wet strings. Her eyes were black hollows, swallowing the moonlight. Her lips moved, but the words came a second too late, like a badly dubbed film. "Emily," it whispered, "come outside. I want to show you something." My chest seized in terror. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My grandfather burst into the room seconds later, shotgun in hand. He shoved me behind him, then poured a thick line of salt across the windowsill. The Rachel thing hissed, its face contorting like wax melting. It pressed a hand to the salt, but couldn't pass. It lingered there all night, tapping softly until dawn drove it away. The next morning, Rachel was alive and well. She swore she'd been home asleep, and maybe she had, or maybe the forest had borrowed her face. From then on, I never questioned the third rule: salt is more than seasoning. Now, years later, the rule came back to haunt me. Daniel and I returned from the clearing with the others. We told no one else what we'd seen, the duplicates, the whispers, the impossible faces, but the look in Daniel's eyes told me he believed everything. Jessica's journal sat heavy in my backpack. The last words, "If I follow them, maybe I'll understand." Back in town, I poured salt around my house with trembling hands. A line at the door, a line at every window, circles around my bedposts. My grandfather used to say, "A house without salt is a house with an open door." That night, the tapping returned. But this time, it wasn't at my window. It was at my front door. 3 sharp knocks. I froze in my rocking chair, salt pouch in one hand, flashlight in the other. Every lamp blazed. The clock read 2:07 a.m. "Emily," a voice called. Jessica's voice. My skin prickled. "Emily, please, let me in. They hurt me." The voice cracked perfectly, like a woman sobbing. But it was too perfect, like an actor hitting their cue. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Emily, the voice begged again, then softer. Don't you want to know what I found in the forest? I clutched the salt pouch tighter. The thing outside scraped against the doorframe, claws or nails dragging down the wood. Then silence. After that night, I knew the truth. Salt was my only shield. The next day, Daniel came to my house. He hadn't slept either. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He carried a duffel bag, heavy enough to sag his arm. I raided the station, he said. Salt, ammo, batteries. If we're going to survive this, we need more than stories. We spread the supplies across my kitchen table. Rock salt in plastic tubs, shotgun shells, heavy-duty flashlights, walkie-talkies. Whatever those things are, Daniel said, they want Jessica, and maybe everyone else who disappeared. But why copy them? Why come back? I thought of the Rachel thing at my window, of Jessica's wide, frozen smile in the forest. They're collectors, I said. That's what her note said. They take people. They wear their faces. Maybe to lure more, maybe for something worse. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we find out, and we end it. We weren't the only ones who remembered the third rule. Mrs. Fincher, the oldest woman in town, had lived through more disappearances than anyone. Her husband, her nephew, 2 grandchildren, all taken by the forest. Yet she was still there, rocking on her porch each evening with a pouch of salt tied to her wrist. I visited her that afternoon, Jessica's journal under my arm. She squinted at me with milky eyes. You've seen them, haven't you? She rasped. I swallowed hard. Yes. Her smile was sad. Then you know salt is the only thing that keeps them out. It doesn't kill them, but it burns. It reminds them there are lines they can't cross. I opened Jessica's notebook, showing her the sketches and notes. Why salt? Why not iron or silver or fire? Mrs. Fincher traced a shaky finger over the pages. Salt is pure, old as the earth. It preserves. It protects. Even the oldest things respect it. Even the collectors. Her voice dropped lower. But salt only holds them back. It doesn't stop what they want. And what do they want? I whispered. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. They want to replace us. That night, Daniel and I tested the theory. We went to the abandoned church at the edge of town. It had been empty since Father O'Malley vanished one November night 15 years ago. Some said he'd left for Anchorage. Others knew better. Inside, the pews were dusty, the air thick with mildew. We poured lines of salt across the doorway and windows, sealing ourselves in. Then we waited. It didn't take long. Shadows moved outside, figures pacing around the church, circling. Whispers slipped through the cracks in the wood, overlapping voices calling our names. Emily, Daniel, let us in. We're cold. I gritted my teeth, holding the flashlight beam steady. Daniel raised his shotgun, but his hands trembled. Then with a crash, something hurled itself against the front door. The wood shook. The salt line flared white, sizzling like fire. The creature screamed, not human, not animal, but something hollow. Daniel fired through the door. Silence followed. When we stepped outside at dawn, the snow was marked with dozens of footprints, some bare, some twisted, some clawed. And in the center of the path, where the salt had burned, lay a blackened handprint. Not human. By the end of that week, half the town knew the collectors were stirring. Windows rattled at night. Doors shook. The forest whispered louder. People stopped asking questions. They started buying salt in bulk. But salt wasn't infinite. Supplies were running low, and we needed more if we were going to survive. That's when Daniel suggested the unthinkable. The mine, he said. The old tunnels east of town. They stored salt there back when they worked the shafts. Tons of it, if it hasn't spoiled. The mine, the same place marked on Jessica's maps, the same circle of disappearances. Going there meant breaking both the first and second rules. Sundown and forest, but without more salt, Blackwood wouldn't last another winter. I nodded slowly. Then we go. The night before we left, I dreamed of Rachel again. She stood at the tree line, her smile frozen, her eyes black pits. "You can't save her," she whispered. "You'll only join us." I woke drenched in sweat, clutching the salt pouch against my chest. The third rule echoed in my mind. Salt is more than seasoning. But would it be enough? Part 4, Rule 4, Strangers Bring Change. Blackwood never stayed the same for long. We had rules, yes, and those rules kept us alive. But there was always something that disrupted the rhythm. Sometimes it was the wilderness itself, storms, blizzards, avalanches. Sometimes it was the things in the dark, pressing against the thin lines of salt and silence. And sometimes it was strangers. Outsiders arrived every few years, drawn by cheap houses, by the illusion of isolation, by the postcard beauty of Denali looming over us like a sleeping god. They never lasted. Some left quietly, others vanished without a trace, and a few stayed. Those were the ones who changed us, for better or worse. The rule was clear: strangers bring change. Jessica Collins had already proved that true. She wasn't just a newcomer, she was an investigator, a woman who had peeled back the curtain we locals had spent generations stitching shut. Her disappearance into the forest hadn't just rattled the town, it had woken something. The collectors were more restless now. They prowled closer, tested doors more aggressively, whispered with sharper voices. But Jessica wasn't the first stranger to shake us. When I was younger, we had a teacher named Ms. Collins, no relation to Jessica. She came from Portland, cheerful and ambitious, her classroom filled with maps and books. She taught us to write essays about hope, to dream of places beyond Blackwood. For a while, she made us believe we could have futures bigger than our town. And then, one October evening, she didn't come home. Search parties scoured the forest, but everyone knew what had happened. Her face never returned, at least not hers. A week later, something with her voice knocked on the principal's office door. He didn't open it. The next day, her classroom was locked forever. We still whispered about her years later. Her maps yellowed, her chalkboard untouched. Strangers brought change, but change was always bought with blood. Now Jessica was gone too, and the collectors weren't hiding anymore. That night, I sat with Daniel at the diner, the only one in town, run by the Cho family for 3 generations. The windows rattled against the wind, though the sky outside was calm, a bad sign. "People are panicking," Daniel said, his coffee untouched. "Half the town wants to leave. And the other half? They want to fight." His gaze was steady. "And we can't do either. If we leave, they'll follow. If we fight without knowing what we're up against, we'll all die." I pulled Jessica's journal from my bag, flipping to the notes about the mine. She thought they kept the originals alive. If that's true, she could still be out there. Alive. Daniel's jaw tightened. "And you want to go after her?" "I have to," I said. My voice didn't waver, though my stomach nodded. "If we don't, this doesn't stop. More strangers will come. More faces will be copied. More voices will knock on our doors." Daniel stared into the dark window, his reflection pale. "Then we go tomorrow, at first light." But Blackwood wasn't waiting for us. At midnight, the collectors came. I woke to screams in the street. My lights were already on, salt lines thick at every door and window. I grabbed my flashlight and peered through the curtain. Dozens of them. Figures moving up Main Street, knocking on doors, calling names. Some wore the faces of the missing. Others wore faces I didn't recognize. Strangers who must have vanished long before my time. And in the center of the road, one face I knew too well. Rachel Monroe. Her black eyes locked on my window, her mouth stretching into that impossible smile. "Emily," she called. "It's cold. Let me in." My chest clenched. She'd been gone for years, gone into the forest on a dare, never to return. I'd mourned her like a sister. Now she was back, or something wearing her was. "Emily," she pleaded, "I'm hungry. Won't you feed me?" I stepped back, bile rising in my throat. My flashlight beam shook in my hands. The collectors spread like water, tapping on glass, rattling door handles, whispering through cracks. But none crossed the salt. They never crossed the salt. Then, from the far end of the street, gunfire cracked. Shouts followed. Daniel's voice barked orders. I bolted to the back door, shoving extra salt into my backpack. Against every instinct, I stepped into the night. Well, the air outside was colder than it should have been, sharp with the metallic stink of the forest. I sprinted through the alley, sticking to shadows. My flashlight beam cut narrow lines across the snow, and I prayed nothing moved in the dark beyond. At the corner, I found Daniel. He was crouched behind his cruiser, rifle raised, his breath fogged in sharp bursts. "They hit the northern block," he said, "tried to drag people out. Anyone taken?" "Not yet." He glanced at me, eyes burning. "But they're not afraid anymore. They're pushing harder." We heard it then, a pounding against wood, splintering, a house 2 streets over. A woman's scream cut through the night. "Go!" Daniel shouted. We ran. The Johnson house was half collapsed when we got there. The front door was smashed, the salt line scattered. Inside, Mr. Johnson was sprawled on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. His wife clutched a shotgun, firing blindly into the dark corners. Shapes moved in the shadows. Too fast, too wrong. One darted past me, its face flickering between Jessica's and Ms. Collins's, like a broken film reel. I scattered salt across the threshold, my hands slick with sweat. The creature hissed, jerking back, its black eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Daniel fired twice. The thing staggered, not from the bullets, but from the salt scattering into its chest. Smoke rose from the wound like burning meat. "Get them out," he shouted. I pulled Mrs. Johnson to her feet, dragging her toward the doorway. She sobbed, clutching her shotgun like a lifeline. Behind us, the collectors shrieked, pounding against the invisible barrier of salt. We spilled into the street. Daniel slammed the door shut, reinforcing it with another line. The Johnsons were alive, but barely, and one more house was lost. By dawn, the collectors had vanished. The street was empty, silent again. But the town was broken. Half the windows shattered, doors splintered, families huddled in fear. The strangers had come back in force, and they weren't leaving. At the emergency meeting in the town hall, people screamed at each other. Some demanded we evacuate. Others wanted to arm up and burn the forest down. Daniel stood at the front, his face pale but steady. "Neither will work," he said. "The only way out is through. We find the mine, we find the originals, and we end this." His words silenced the crowd, not because they believed, but because they had no other choice. I thought of Jessica, of Rachel, of Ms. Collins, of all the strangers who had come and never left. Strangers brought change, and this time, the change was war. That night, as I prepared my pack, salt, flashlight, spare batteries, shotgun shells, I thought of my grandfather's voice. "Strangers bring change, Emily. Sometimes they bring hope, sometimes they bring death, but they always leave a mark." Jessica had already left her mark. Her arrival had torn open the curtain, and now nothing would ever be the same. I zipped my pack, shouldered the weight, and looked out the window at the forest. Tomorrow we would enter the mine. Tomorrow we would face what waited in the dark. And tomorrow we would learn whether change meant salvation or the end of us all. Part 5, Rule 5. Never forget why we stay. People always ask me why anyone would choose to live in Blackwood. Why not leave? Why keep children here? Why keep building lives in a place where the night and the forest and the rules press so close? For years, I didn't have an answer. Now, after Jessica vanished, after Rachel's black-eyed smile haunted me from the street, after the collectors prowled openly through town, I understood. The answer wasn't comfort. It wasn't safety. It wasn't even choice. It was the 5th and final rule. Never forget why we stay. The morning after the town hall meeting, I stood at the edge of Pine Street with a pack on my shoulders and frost burning in my lungs. Daniel was already there, his cruiser idling, exhaust ghosting into the frozen air. He looked exhausted but resolute, his duffel bag stuffed with weapons and salt. Behind us, Blackwood was quiet, too quiet. Curtains drawn, houses sealed, families waiting to see if we would return. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, though my stomach was a knot of dread. "As ready as I'll ever be." We weren't going alone. Two others joined us. Mark Cho, son of the diner owners, steady-handed with a rifle, and Elena Vasquez, the nurse who had stitched more wounds than anyone in Blackwood. Both carried salt. Both carried fear. We set out toward the mine. The forest was brittle with cold, the ground crusted with ice. Every branch crackled like bones snapping underfoot. The deeper we went, the more the silence pressed against us. Jessica's journal guided us. Maps marked with circles, notes scribbled in the margins. Eastern shaft, tunnel C, pattern of disappearances converges. For 2 hours, we moved in a single file, marking our path with salt lines. Whispers rode the wind, faint but constant. Once I swore I heard Rachel's voice behind me. I didn't turn. I knew better. Finally, the trees broke, revealing the mine entrance, a concrete mouth in the hillside, yawning black. The old steel door hung crooked, rust streaking down its sides. "This is it," Daniel said, voice tight. I pulled the salt pouch from my chest, scattering a thick line across the threshold. Then, one by one, we stepped inside. The tunnels swallowed us whole. The air grew damp and metallic, heavy with the stink of rust and something sweeter, rotten. Our flashlight beams barely pushed the dark back. Old rails lined the floor, warped with time. Broken beams jutted like ribs from the walls. Water dripped steadily, echoing down unseen passages. After 10 minutes, we reached the first chamber, and that's when we saw them. Bodies. Dozens. They sat slumped against the walls, pale and thin, their chests rising and falling in shallow breaths. Some faces I recognized. Alex Murphy, missing 3 years. Mrs. Fincher's grandson. Even Ms. Collins, our old teacher, her hair streaked gray but her body alive. And in the corner, Jessica. Her eyes fluttered open when our light hit her. Her lips cracked into a weak smile. "You came." I dropped to my knees beside her, fumbling with a water bottle. "We're getting you out." But Daniel's voice cut sharp. "We're not alone." Shadows stirred in the far tunnel, shapes emerging, dozens, maybe hundreds, faces pale and familiar, bodies moving stiffly, eyes black as coal. The collectors. They poured into the chamber, circling us in silence. Then the whispers began. Our names, our fears, our secrets. Voices layered on voices, some of the missing, some of the dead. The false Rachel stepped forward, her smile too wide. "Emily," she said, "leave the salt. Stay with us." I clenched the pouch in my fist. My hands shook, but I scattered a wide circle around Jessica and the others. The creatures hissed, halting at the edge. Daniel raised his rifle. Mark took aim beside him. Elena knelt to check pulses, whispering frantic prayers. The collectors pressed closer, their whispers rising into a chorus. The walls shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. "They don't want to kill us," Jessica croaked, her voice cracked but steady. "They want to replace us." Her words hit me like ice. That was why they mimicked, why they wore faces, spoke voices. They weren't just hunting. They were building something, a community of hollow echoes, and we were the raw material. The salt circle wouldn't hold forever. Already some grains scattered across the uneven stone. The collectors surged, pressing closer. "We need more salt," Daniel barked. "There," I gasped, pointing to a rusted cart at the chamber's edge, half filled with rock salt from decades past. Mark sprinted, scattering a line as he went. The creatures hissed, recoiling, but one lunged. Its face flickered between Ms. Collins and Jessica, a nightmare of mismatched features. The thing hit him hard. His rifle clattered. I screamed, rushing forward, hurling salt into its face. Smoke billowed, and the creature shrieked, retreating. Mark scrambled back, his shirt torn, blood welling beneath. "Go!" Daniel shouted. "Get the salt!" I grabbed fistfuls from the cart, hurling them around the circle, thickening the barrier. The collectors shrieked, their black eyes blazing, but still, they didn't retreat. They waited. That's when the ground shook. A low rumble deep beneath us, like the earth groaning. Cracks split across the chamber floor. Water seeped upward, black and foul. "They're waking something," Jessica whispered. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Something older." The collectors' whispers rose into screams, their bodies jerking in unison. The air grew hot, metallic, and then, from the darkness beyond, a shape moved. Larger than any of them, taller than the tunnel ceiling. Its face was a blur of shifting features, hundreds of stolen visages melting into one. Its eyes glowed with black fire, the Collector King. The others bowed as it entered, their whispers falling silent. It stepped to the salt line, its shifting face bending into something like a smile. "You don't belong here," it said. Its voice was every voice at once, layered and endless. "Leave the shells. Join the collection." The walls shook. Jessica screamed. And I understood. This was what they had been building toward for decades. Not just copies, not just replacements, but something greater. A hive, a monarch, a king. We didn't stand a chance, not unless we sealed the mine. I met Daniel's eyes. He nodded, already reading my thoughts. "Elena, Mark, get them out," he barked. "Now." "What about you?" Elena cried. "We'll hold it back," I said. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "Go!" She hesitated, then grabbed Jessica under the arms, dragging her toward the tunnel. Mark limped after them, clutching his bleeding side. The Collector King pressed closer, its burning eyes fixed on me. "You can't win," it said. "You can only join." "Not today," I whispered. Daniel fired, salt rounds exploding against its chest. Smoke and fire burst, the thing roaring. I hurled salt from both hands, the pouch nearly empty. The king staggered but didn't fall. The other collectors surged, slamming against the circle, shrieking in fury. "Now!" Daniel shouted. We broke the circle ourselves, sprinting toward the exit. The creatures followed, their voices rising into a deafening roar. I scattered salt behind us, slowing them, but they pressed closer. The tunnels shook, dust choking the air. Ahead, daylight glimmered faintly. We burst into the open, lungs heaving. Elena and Mark were already dragging the rescued toward the trees. Behind us, the mine rumbled like thunder. Daniel yanked a flare from his pack, lit it, and hurled it inside. The old timbers caught instantly, flames racing. The earth groaned, and then the hillside collapsed, sealing the entrance in an avalanche of rock and fire. The screams cut off. The forest fell silent. We staggered back into Blackwood at dusk, battered and broken, but alive. Jessica lay in the clinic, pale but conscious. The others, Alex Murphy, Ms. Collins, the rest, were alive too, though none remembered their captivity. The town gathered, eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in decades, some of the missing had returned. But we all knew it wasn't victory. The collectors weren't gone. The king wasn't dead, only buried. Still, something had changed. The rules had always been about survival. Stay inside after dark, respect the forest, trust the salt, beware of strangers. But now I understood the fifth rule. We stayed because leaving wouldn't save us. The collectors would follow, their whispers spreading beyond the forest, beyond Denali, beyond Alaska. We stayed because Blackwood was our shield. We stayed because the rules worked, if we remembered them. And we stayed because sometimes the only way to survive was to face the darkness together. It's that night I sat by my window, salt lines thick, every lamp blazing. The forest loomed beyond, endless and silent. I thought of my grandfather's voice, of Rachel's smile, of Jessica's courage, of Daniel's steadiness. The fifth rule echoed in my head, never forget why we stay, because Blackwood wasn't just a prison. It wasn't just a trap. It was a promise that no matter how dark the night, no matter how hungry the forest, no matter how many faces the collectors wore, we would stand together. And that was enough for now.